my name is Baz, and this is my video out. I found a really wonderful queer series that third book isn't out yet, but I've just been reading and rereading and rereading. So it is the Simon Snow series by Rainbow Rowell. The first book is Carry On, and the second book is called Wayward Son. So kind of like the Kansas song, but yeah. Yep. My name is Baz Michaels. My pronouns are they, them, or z here, and I identify as queer and non-binary. I grew up about 2 minutes down the road in Avondale on 47th Street, so local, Birmingham. Growing up in the South, all of my family is Southern. None of us are transplants. So growing up in the South, I think the culture has shaped me a lot. Just the culture of Southern hospitality, I think, helps you keep an open mindset to a certain degree. Just the concept of, we love each other and we take care of our neighbors. Even if you don't agree with who your neighbors are and what your neighbors are, you're supposed to be kind to people. And obviously that you don't always come across that. That's not always how that happens. But just the concept of, you take care of each other in this community and you work hard in this community and you band together. I think that that's something, at least a part of Southern culture that I've grown up in, is working hard and taking care of the people around you, even if you don't always agree with them. And to a certain degree, as a queer person living in the South, there's only a certain degree of taking care of people that I don't agree with that I can handle, because don't agree with can also include people that don't think that I should exist, and there is that line. Yeah, but just people who come from different walks of life, and that sense of community, from what I understand from friends that aren't from the South or who are transplants, there's not always such a sense of community outside of this culture, of keeping together and we take care of each other. And I think that that's translated into our queer community and into my relationships with people, is keeping an open mind and taking care of your own. So, yeah. I was about 14 years old, so I was a freshman at the time. Honestly, I can't really remember. I think the first person that I told was one of my closest friends from middle school. She came out to me as lesbian, and I came out to her as bi at the time. I believe that was the first person I came out to. I went to a fairly queer-friendly school, so it was fairly easy for me to come out at the time. Most of my classmates were queer. A lot of my classmates were also trans and non-binary. I remember GSA came into our homeroom, and it was a close friend of mine that was talking about it and talking about the way that they identified. And I started to hear all of these words for the first time, and I started asking that friend these questions about, well, what does it mean to be non-binary? What do you mean that there's more than just being a guy or a girl? I think that was sometime in the fall, and I remember that being the first time that I realized that, okay, there's more than just these two options. And it kind of struck me, because I remember being younger and all of my friends talking about, being a girl and feeling like a girl, and I remembered I never felt like a boy, but I always felt like, oh, well, being a girl, it's like being a woman. It's one of those things that you understand when you grow up. I'll understand that when I grow up. I'm too young to understand that now. And I never did, because I never was. So that was kind of the first time that it had been put into words, was when GSA came into my homeroom in 9th grade. So I do remember that very specifically, yeah. Well, my parents have always been fairly open-minded. My family, to a lesser extent, but still fairly open-minded when it comes to queer identities. So it was fairly easy for me to come out as bi to my parents. It was a lot harder for me coming out as trans, just because I was kind of keenly aware that if it took me 14 years to realize what this was, who's to say that the other people around me are going to understand it? And so I was afraid of, how do I explain this to people so that they understand what I'm saying? And I remember telling my parents, or I wrote my dad a letter with definitions and descriptions and stuff like that. And it was received fairly well by my dad. My mother at the time was not very happy about it. She had transgender friends, but they were all binary trans. And she didn't see that as that being me. And my parents were concerned about me being queer and trans in Alabama. And I had never actually really thought about it until my father expressed some concerns for safety. And I was living kind of in an insular environment of people that were like me, people that were friends with other people like me. And it wasn't really until I got out of high school and into college that I started to realize that, not everybody is going to be as open-minded and understanding as the people that I was around at the time. And I did deal with a lot of classmates and certain family members refusing to acknowledge that that's what was happening. And even now, to a certain degree, certain family members that just don't bother with it. The first instance of it really becoming an issue was my grandmother is a lot more traditional. She's very traditional, very Southern, and she was not having it. And so it's been difficult dealing with family and remembering that outside of my little group of people, this isn't perceived as okay and as normal. I think sometimes I forget that that's the case because I stay within my little bubble. And within that bubble, I found a lot of safety and a lot of solidarity, which has made it a lot easier to handle being at work and people not responding well, and going to classes and people not responding well, and family not responding well. I've built up a shell, but it was difficult at first without that shell, without that this is who I am, as I was questioning and not having that secure, solid identity. It was really difficult for me to plant my feet and say, you can't push me over. I've built that up now, but at the beginning it was very, very hard. Yeah. That's a tough one. Man, legislation, I think, is a big issue. I know in high school I was part of a group that was lobbying for certain amendments to be changed, just with the way that Alabama legislation is, and our amendment is a nightmare, our constitution is a nightmare. There's still amendments on the books that, if you teach sex ed in high schools, you have to teach abstinence, and you have to make note that being gay is against the law, even though it's not. So just still fighting back and understanding, we're here, we're queer, we live in the South, we don't want to leave, we're happy where we are. Living in an area where state government is so actively fighting back against us. Alabama has, or at least Birmingham in my experience, has a really rich and really resilient queer community. And it's hard when you're living in an area with a state government that doesn't want to acknowledge that you're here and doesn't want to acknowledge that, you deserve to be treated the same way that everybody else is. And I think secondary to that, a big issue facing the queer community, at least from my experience in the South, is that people who aren't from this area, who have never been to the South, who've never actually taken the time to understand what it's like down here, expect Southern queers to just, you turn 18 and you leave, and trying to explain to people that, we don't have to leave, and we shouldn't have to leave to be treated like people. We shouldn't have to leave to find a community, to find safety, and trying to explain to them we have a rich and resilient queer community in the South, and we're proud to be here, and we're proud to be from here. And I shouldn't have to uproot my life and move to New York City in order to be respected. And that's not financially feasible for most people, especially in the South. So I think fighting against the stigma that we're all the same, and, you know, if you want to have rights, you need to leave. Yeah, I don't agree with that. So, yeah. That's a lot of things. Really, I think, and this is a big one, but I would love to see a pretty significant overhaul in our state government. Just for a lot of things, we have one of the most corrupt state governments in the entire country. And I think that it's letting all of us down. But I think those of us who are part of marginalized communities are especially feeling the pressure of it. And ideally, in my lifetime, there would be a shift in how much pressure is put on people who are marginalized by such a huge body of power. I'd like to see a lot more liberation, ideally, in my state that fits more with how our communities exist with each other. Because I feel like the way that we're represented and the people that are supposed to represent us don't represent us in the slightest. You know, I'd like to see a correlation between, you know, how communities are run and how we handle each other within our communities. I think that we'd all flourish a lot better if there was more balance there, at least. Again, I think it all comes back to community, you know. That's one thing about living under such kind of an oppressive government, is that the community gets even stronger and stronger, and we start finding ways to, okay, if you're not going to take care of us, then we're going to take care of ourselves. We're going to take care of each other. And especially in the past few years, I think I've seen a lot more of that, in Birmingham at least, of groups forming and collectives forming, where we start to take care of each other, where we're making sure that we're all eating and that we're all clothed and that we're all housed and we're all safe and that we're protecting each other. We've risen up and we've grown pretty resilient, I've noticed, in the past few years, because I have a history of homelessness in relation to being trans, and I'm seeing all of these organizations being formed now to help people in situations like that and help prevent situations like that. And I think that it's been really incredible to see how much we've stood up and started to take care of each other. We've realized, you know, okay, this isn't going to happen on a state level, so we need to do it ourselves. And I think that that's really amazing and really empowering to see. If I were to give advice to a younger queer me, or really any younger queer people, it would be to take your time. It's okay to question. It's okay to not know exactly who you are right now. It took me, to this day, how I identify myself still is in flux. And I think that it always will be. And that's just part of growing up and part of maturing over time. You know, you're always going to continue to grow in areas of your life, and who you are and your queer identity will mirror that. It's okay to not know exactly who you are right now. There's no rush. You know, it gets better. And you'll come into yourself when you're ready. You just gotta be patient. Yeah. It just feels good. Looking back at my history, personal history, and not knowing who I was and thinking, oh, well, you know, I guess I'll grow into knowing. And looking at now, being loud and proud, and here I am, coming into myself has been an incredible experience. and coming into myself has helped me heal from so many things in the past. It's a hard question to answer, I guess. It's just, I feel happier now being myself openly and proudly than I ever thought that I would be able to. I'm a library student, so I will always take book recommendations. Yes.